Hi, my name is Eric Kim, and I represent Youth for KVeterans, an initiative aimed at creating awareness for Korean War veterans through interviews and other educational materials. Thank you for joining me today, both of you, Mr. Charles Chipley and Mr. Bob Mount. It means so much for you guys to come here today. So just as my first question, just as a starter, may I ask how old both of you are?
I'm 91.
I'm 90.
So
We were both young over there.
yeah, so when were you involved in Korea?
When?
When?
I arrived in Korea in July of 1950, and I left in August of 51.
I was in the Navy, and I was in on a heavy cruiser, and we were down in the Philippines at the time when the war started. And like Bob, I got up to Korea July the 3rd in 1950, and I was on and off until 1952, back and forth on a different coast.
Did you both know each other when you were shipped out to Korea?
No.
No.
Did what?
Did you know each other during the Korean
Oh,
War?
no, not at all.
How did you two come to know each other then?
When we started our Korean War Veterans chapter here in our hometown of Frederick, where we live, I should say. That's when we got to really know each other.
Right. What branches of the military were you guys involved in?
I was in the Army. I was a combat engineer.
Mr. Chipley?
And I was in the Navy on a heavy cruiser.
Heavy cruiser. So before the Korean War broke out, there was World War II. And did this affect you and your family in any sort of way?
World War II, sure. We lived through all of the rationing, all of the stuff that affected civilians.
Basically, everybody at that time was rationing of everything from gasoline to different types of food items and so forth, but it really wasn't that bad like other countries and all.
Right. Do you think that this sort of memory of World War II, do you think that sort of affected the way that society reacted to stuff like the Korean War?
Oh, certainly. The belief was that World War II ended wars. There wouldn't be any more wars. And when Korea broke out, the belief was that we'd only be there for 5 or 6 months. We'd be back home.
Yeah, they after World War II, like Bob said, we really the people started back to living a good life. And when the Korean War broke out, most of them back home just read about in the paper and didn't even really, I think, register with them too much because like everybody else, well, where's Korea? And that's a small country. Why don't they take care of themselves? Sounds like an internal thing, North and South type and all. So they really, back in the States, they really didn't, sadly, think too much about it.
Right. From my experience with talking to other veterans, a lot of them said that Americans described the Korean War as a police action rather than a war. But what are your guys' opinions about this?
Well, it was a police action from the standpoint of we didn't have a congressional declaration of war. So from that standpoint, it was a police action. But from the actuality of it, the casualties were so high in the first few months, and we were not prepared for a war. And the troops that we were sending into war, not my case, but many of them were reservists who hadn't had training. So they were getting slaughtered.
Yeah, we all felt, we that was actually involved in all you're saying, those guys back home don't know what they're talking about. So they didn't really realize that we knew it wasn't a police action. So,
Mhm. Right. So before joining the military, what was your perception of Korea and East Asia in general?
Well, I personally had never heard of Korea.
right.
And I was from a farming community and in high school, about where you are now
And
at time.
naturally, when you say, yes, we didn't really know Korea. And when you said about Asia, we just know that we went to war with Japan and that China was on our side and Chinook and all them flying tigers, so we were all feel like we were friendly
Mhm.
nation. So that's
So for both of you, did you both choose to enlist in the branches of military that you did?
Yes,
yes. We were both ends. I'm enlisted in 1949, so I was in before that started. I was on a nice, beautiful world cruise
Mhm.
before this thing started, and
Huh.
shot right up there for the next couple of years.
Mhm.
Already enlisted. Was having a ball.
Mr. Mao, did you enlist?
I enlisted in 1948.
Hmm.
And when Korea started, I was in Hawaii
Oh.
and had a wonderful job there. I was a regimental clerk and I had a position that allowed me to fall out in Class A uniform every day, and I had a Jeep and a driver. That was very nice duty.
Mhm.
And I was awakened on the 18th of July. I was awakened and sent over to the regimental headquarters to cut the orders, transferring us to the Asian theater and handling some promotions of some of the men that were in line for promotion. And the next morning, I was out on the grass in front of the barracks, waiting to get on a truck to go down to a ship heading for Korea. So we had about, I'm sure that the command I was under had advanced knowledge of our moving, but we as troops had about 10 hours of advance notice that we were going someplace. We didn't know where we were going. We were just going to a ship and going out someplace. And it wasn't until we had been out to sea for 4 hours, far enough so we couldn't swim back, that they told us that we were going to Korea.
Mhm. So why did you both choose to enlist in 1948 and 1949?
Go ahead, Robert.
I chose to enlist because I was in a small town with no opportunities to get ahead. I was in a little school. My graduating class had 12 people, 12 students, and there was no opportunities there for anything in that little town. It was about 600 people. So I thought I would go into the military and get some experience outside of the little bit of experience that I had in that small town.
Where did you used to live?
In a small town in upstate New York State.
Hmm.
I was about like Bob, graduated from high school, and then at that time, family and all couldn't afford to go to college, and so there wasn't anything. Plus, I was from a Navy family, used to moving all the time, but I one of the people that likes to travel and likes to see the world and interested in all the other countries and their cultures and all. So that's the reason why I joined the Navy, to see the world, as they said.
Mhm.
So that was my reason for joining.
So when you guys heard the announcement then that you were going to Korea, what were your reactions to that?
Well, I personally didn't have much of any reaction at all because I didn't know what Korea was or where it was.
Uh-huh.
Now, many of the people in my outfit did, because I was with the 5th Regimental Combat Team, and that combat team was formed in Korea in 1949 and sent to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii to maintain readiness for war. So we were in a small group of people that were ready to go back to Korea to help Korea if it needed help. So many of our people had been in Korea before. But that wasn't my case. I went there as a raw recruit. I had never even heard of Korea.
That was me. We were on a cruise down in the Philippines when the war broke out, and they said we're going straight up to Korea, and they, where's Korea and why and all this. So really didn't know what was going on, period, or why.
So upon arriving in Korea, then what did you see?
We got off of a ship with a field pack on our back, and we're immediately, our infantry, the combat team that we were in had its own artillery, its own infantry, its own engineers, its own medics, all of the duties that you need. And our infantry was immediately assigned to go to Mason to beef up the 24th Division. 24th Division was one of those divisions that was sent in first and had not been training for a war. They were living a peacetime life. And when they got into the war, they were getting killed. And some companies lost all of their officers 3 times. That's how bad the fighting was. And we were sent over there to help them. Our infantry went in first and we went behind them. And we stayed on the Pusan perimeter until September 15th. So we were involved in one way or another in that initial defense of the small piece of Korea that was left when we got there, just that little bit around Pusan. And we were on the Pusan defense team. Eventually we moved to over close to the north of Pusan, where our headquarters was. And it was a big secret that we were going to make an invasion at Inchon, but all of us troops knew that was what was going to happen. We discussed it ourselves, and we knew that was the big time. All we had to do was hang on for another 2 months, and we would make that invasion at Inchon, and that would stop the North from pursuing that little corner that they had down around Pusan.
Mr. Chipley, what did you see when you arrived in Korea?
Well, we got up there early July, and our mission basically being was gunfire support ashore for as far in as we could protect the troops against the tanks coming in. We also destroyed like railroad train tracks so the enemy couldn't bring in supplies. We had a helicopter on board, so our mission was for rescue and all. And of course, right at the very beginning, maybe we did have like a landing at Pohong Dong and Wonsan, and we helped with the invasion there by clearing out the area where they're going to land. And naturally is involved in the Inchon invasion, where we leveled off the shoreline for a couple of days firing, so there wasn't any heavy gun replacements there when we landed the troops. And we did a pretty good job, because when the Marines landed, there were very, very few casualties there. And of course, we had spotters in our helicopters just to go in where the enemy were at. So we did pretty good. And of course, the ROK Korean people, some of the troops in shore and inland, they'd call back and give a grid location where the enemy might be. And so we were pretty accurate with our fire there. We never had any casualties. We were setting further out, being we was a cruiser. But our destroyers naturally used to go in closer so they could fire. However, their size guns was the same as the enemy ashore, so the enemy could shoot back at them. And some of them did get hit and lose a couple of men. The only incident we had was really the only ship involved was after the Inchon invasion. We were sitting there 2 days after the invasion on a Sunday, and a couple of Korean aircraft came in, a bomber and 2 fighters, and a whole bunch of our ships in the bay there. And of course, on our ship, we had the Big Admiral for the invasion, and the bomber came in and dropped 4 bombs at us. Thank God he had bad eyesight or something, but the 3 bombs hit alongside the ship, and shrapnel didn't hurt too much. 4th bomb hit our crane in the back, bounced off in the water and didn't explode. If that sucker would have bounced and came and hit the ship, we had our fuel tank back there, the whole ship would have went up. So the good Lord was watching over us on the incident. Yeah. So that was the only really thing that we was ever got fired upon is really dangerous. And one of the British cruisers, the Jamaica, was with us, and one of the fighter planes fired at them and killed one of their people and all, but their pom-pom guns shot down the plane and all. So they were wide awake. Yeah.
So from what it sounds, both of you were involved in the Inchon Landings. Is that correct?
Yes, I was.
Yes.
Wow.
We were waiting for the Inchon landing. That's what opened up our advance to the north. But I wanted to mention one thing. You said, what did we see? We saw a bunch of unpaved roads. It was difficult to maneuver our vehicles around because most of the roads in Korea at that time were dirt ox cart paths. And as engineers, much of our work was making those roads passable for our vehicles.
Mr. Chipley, you were in the Navy, right? But from what I understand, shorelines would often have mines within the water, right? So that you can't pass through. How exactly did the American Navy sort of navigate through these sort of traps that were set?
Oh, the mines and all?
Yeah.
You say? Oh, well, that was a problem. Yes. That was another one of our things, was exploding the mines, finding them and so forth. One of the things we did also, as well as aircraft support and so forth. That's another thing. We're very fortunate that we had control of the skies with we had a couple aircraft carriers with us and all. So we had control of that. But yes, we did a lot of mines. We had our own little mine sweeping ships also, and the destroyers did it. Now, some of them did get hit by mines, but we didn't, and we were fortunate enough to find some and explode them to get rid of them. But yes, that was a big problem, big problem. And I guess Bob knows too. Of course, getting further on the war, when they got the 38th parallel kind of settled between the two, well, the North Koreans are still, what was the Han River that comes all the way down? They were sending mines and dead bodies coming down to South Korea to do that a lot of times. Bob might have seen all that. So yeah, mines was a big problem. You don't hear about them.
Yeah. Do you both recall any specific experiences with Korean civilians?
We
At that,
were,
maybe
we were-
him at the time, but no.
we were, first of all, when we went through little towns, there was always somebody in there waiting to take care of our laundry. That was the only time we had to chance to get our uniforms washed. And there was always young Korean boys mostly that would come around and wash your clothes. And they would take them back, and apparently the adults would do the washing. But we never lost any clothes that way. We were advised to keep away from, because when we were going north, there were big columns of civilians going south, escaping from the North Koreans. And we were advised to stay well away from them, because those civilians, some of them were sympathetic to the North, and they were bombing themselves. They were walking bombs. And we were told to keep away from those lines of civilians that were going south. But we were within 40, 50 feet of them when they were going south, when they were near us. But we never interacted with that part of the civilian population, because of the fear that they were amongst them were people carrying bombs.
Right. So among these people then, do you recall sort of what they were taking with them?
They all had packs on their heads. Presumably that's all the clothing that they had, was what they could carry on their head.
Right. When you were walking through towns, did you ever have any like specific thoughts about the people's living conditions while walking through, let's say, destroyed towns?
Yes, we felt sorry for them, but I wouldn't say we had any real interaction there. Other than they were a way to get our clothes washed. Every once in a while, the town would have a community bath, which came as a great surprise to us, because when we were traveling, and when we were there, there weren't any bases when I was there. We were always on the move, so you never had a chance to set up a shower or anything like that. Some of these little towns had a community bath, and we would get a chance to go in there and get a bath. And it was a surprise to us to find females in there washing your back and such.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an interaction that we had with the villagers.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever work with foreign soldiers then? I know, Mr. Chipley, you talked about how you worked with the British Navy.
Yes. Yeah, well, we were all United Nations, so we had all different kinds, and we worked with in the different units and squadrons and all. So we never, of course, never had pulled in anywhere for liberty or anything. So we used to go down sometimes back to Japan to replenish the ship and repairs and so forth and all, and back and forth. But just operating with them was about basically what we did. Had a British aircraft carrier also with us and all. And so I know ashore with Bob, you had all sorts of other nations with their troops, Turkish and everything else, that the North Koreans really feared. So we heard. So I was a combat engineer company. There's two 72nd combat engineers in Korea at the time. One was a battalion and one was a company. I was with the one that was a company. And we were assigned to any outfit that needed engineers for any reason. I served with the British, with the
South Koreans, with the Turks, Australians. I can't, with the Marines.
I'll be right back.
Yeah.
I couldn't, I can't remember all of the outfits that we were with.
Did you have any specific memories with like that you shared with these people, or was it generally just working together on these sort of operations?
Just working together,
Mm.
helping them.
Mhm.
We helped the Air Force by filling in craters in the landing strips. We helped other people with putting in minefields or taking out minefields. I carried a minesweeper frequently. I was a clerk when we went to Korea, and I became a demolition person while I was there. And that was my main assignment. And I carried a minesweeper. When we put in minefields, I went back after the minefield was laid out. I went in and armed the mines.
So for both of you, what were the conditions like during the Korean War? And especially like, how was the food?
Food was hit and miss. We were sometimes our cooks could draw rations, so they could prepare proper meals. But many times when we were on the move, all we had was sea rations, which is what they call meals ready to eat now.
Right.
But they're a lot different now than what they were then. These were World War II leftover sea rations that had been put in storage. So
oh wow.
it was not the freshest nor the best.
Generally, what would you see in these sea rations that you had? Like what foods would you on a normal daily basis eat?
Sea rations they always had a little cup of tin cup. You had a little can opener in there and had a little tin cup of fruit of some kind, peaches or pears or something like that, some kind of fruit. It had a couple of hard biscuits, and it had a package of meat of some kind.
Yeah, spam used to be very popular.
Spam. Most of the time it was potted meat or spam. That was it. Yeah, and you had your canteen on your belt for water.
Yeah, when you talk about spam, that's really interesting because I think in Korea today, spam is extremely popular, and spam is usually given as even like a gift during like, especially between coworkers, because there's like laws in place about the amount of money that you can spend on presents. And so spam is a very common present. And I think that might have started maybe at the Korean War.
Might have.
Mr. Chipley, how was the food?
I love spam. Trouble is I can't eat anymore. Kind of the salt contact to kill you.
Yeah.
No, with that, that's the reason why you should join the Navy if you're talking about food. Of course, we didn't have any problem. We got all our stores in the storeroom. We just bring it up, and we got the cooks and everything. So there really wasn't too much difference feeding. We just maybe ate different hours and faster and everything. So with the Navy, there wasn't any really difference in the food. When you talk about the weather, of course, Bob had to live out in it. Where in the Navy, we'd be out maybe for our gun mounts, for our watches and all for 4, 5, 6 hours, but then we could go down underneath the ship and get warmed up, especially in the winter when the temperatures, 20 below and all like that. So from our point of view, and when we was out in the weather, we had enough foul weather gear to keep us fairly warm and all. Where there are no Bob in the Army, when this thing first started, they only had the doggone still the summer issue, and I don't think they really got any winter uniforms to the Army until way late in the war. Is that right, Bob?
Yeah, I told you, we went there from Hawaii. And when my unit got all the way to the north up to the Yalu River. And when we got up there, that's when the temperatures were 20 below zero, etc. We were still wearing the same boots and the same socks that we came to Korea with. And the only thing extra that we got a field jacket, and we got a cap with ear laps that would pull down over your ears, and a scarf to put around your neck. And that was all of the extra winter gear we got. So we were freezing most of the time when we were up north. But they never thought about issuing us more clothes, because they said, you're going to be out of here by Christmas.
Yeah.
You can get by with what you've got until then. They
Wait,
didn't say
Mr.
what year. They didn't say Christmas what year.
Right. Mr. Chipley, you said earlier that your ship would often go to Japan to replenish supplies, but how often did they do that? And when you did go to replenish, did you ever get to eat fresh food?
Well, we go down maybe after 90 days straight of cruising around, we'd go back for a week or less, and then fill up and go right back. So when you say fresh food, even though the Navy's kind of different, fresh food is always a big problem. Don't last too long, but in this world today, you have supply ships that come and you replenish even in the middle of the ocean. And so they bring so-called fresh food there. So we'll still have it. Maybe it lasts for maybe a week before we get into everything canned and all. So we didn't do too bad with a lot of the fresh food, and so we were very, very fortunate from that point of view, being in the Navy.
Right. Was there any specific memory that sticks out in your mind even today from the Korean War?
Oh, Jesus. All of them, especially what we really didn't talk about, which was horrible, was the Hungnam evacuation. And of course, I was involved in that also, being that we went from one coast to the other all the time for the gunfire support. Of course, we was up there to help protect the Marines from the chosen who were coming into Hungnam to evacuate, as well as about 100,000 civilians. And of course, it was on Christmas. It was like December the 20th to 21st, or in December, I guess it first started. So we were there. And so the Chinese coming down, and as soon as they got within 15-mile range of our gun, we could protect our troops that were retreating, and not only troops, but also civilian. But really, the Korean people were supporting each other, because in the evacuation, as well as our type of ships and all, there were thousands of all sorts of little ships and junks or whatever you want to call them, to help evacuate their own people out, to take them down to Busan. And that was something to see. Everybody was working together, and it was a successful evacuation. And of course, sad to say, we had to destroy the city so the enemy couldn't use it. So we would bombard piers and every doggone thing else, so they couldn't use them after we all left. And of course, probably maybe even some of Bob's people would set off charges and dynamite explosives and all to take care of the whole place so that the enemy couldn't use it. But I say that was a sad story, but it was also very thrilling to see all these people helping one another. It was really, really nice. Civilians and all. Yeah, so that was very memorable.
Mr. Mount?
One, well, there's lots of times. one time we went ahead of the infantry to inspect a railroad bridge to make sure that it was usable to get supplies. After the infantry went ahead and captured the country, they needed to get the supplies to them. And we had to check that railroad bridge. And as soon as our first person got up on the tracks, they drew fire from the enemy. And we radioed and got artillery support into the bush, into the brush that was around us. So to take out the snipers that were there. That was a neat experience, if I might say so, to watch the infantry or watch the artillery bomb those particular, just those little spots that we needed to have them hit. But the most impressive thing that I had, or the thing that helped us the most, was in the big retreat. We were sent up to join a South Korean unit, and we got there at dusk the night before, and our platoon leader went up, the driver took the platoon leader up to the top of the mountain, and they could look down with their field glasses and see the Chinese coming across the bridge down below. And we reasoned that our purpose in being there was to join this South Korean unit that we would with them fight our way down to the bridge and blow it. The next morning, before daylight, we heard truck engines start. And the South Korean unit that we had joined the night before was leaving, heading south. So because they left and went south, we left and went south also. So we didn't have to fight our way down to that bridge and blow it. And that saved our neck, because if we'd have had to go down there and get involved in that fight, I don't know how many of us would have been left. So I remember that, how lucky we were that we were assigned to them, and they decided to go south. Because at noon that day, MacArthur gave the order to retreat. Well, we were already a half a day ahead of him on the way south. And it was very difficult trying to move south because the entire army was moving south. And it was a very difficult time to get around. So I remember how the South Koreans making a decision to get out of there saved us our lives.
After serving in Korea, what did you two do when you got back to the United States?
Well, the first thing, I hooked up with an old girlfriend. And
That was smart.
I got out of the Army on December 8th, and on March 3rd, I was married. And in May, the medicine that I've been getting in the Army for, we took quinine, but they gave us a different thing to protect from malaria. But after medicine got out of my system, the malaria took over, and that nearly killed me. And I wound up in a VA hospital. And I guess I was, well, of course I was delirious because of the malaria, but I was trying, the doctor wanted to admit me, and I was fighting with him, I guess, about being admitted, until he said, listen, you either let me admit you or you'll be dead in 2 weeks. I said, okay, admit me. But that was the way my life started out after I got out. I got a job, of course, but then I got married, and then I got malaria, and then I went to college. The normal stuff.
Mhm.
That malaria was the worst time I ever had. And the civilian doctors didn't know anything about it, and they were treating me for having a cold. And when I was in Buffalo, New York, visiting my aunt, and it was time to go back to my parents, which was 50 miles away. And I started out and I had a head-on collision in an intersection. And the police thought I was drunk or on drugs or something. But my wife convinced them that I was really sick. So they took me to the VA station right there in town. And my wife tells the story that we were sitting there waiting for a doctor to come out and talk, or somebody to come out and talk to us. And a nurse came out and she started taking her shoes off. She got one shoe off and she kept looking over at me, and she got up and went in and got a doctor. And the doctor came out, and it wasn't but 2 minutes until he had me in an ambulance on my way over to the VA hospital. And I was in the hospital for about almost a month. But at that point, when I had malaria, I was sure I was going to die. But it was so severe that if you've never seen anybody with it, malaria gets you twice a day. And when it's not attacking you, it hides. And what happens is you go to the doctor, you've got a high fever, and he sends you over to get blood drawn. By that time, the blood is drawn and hid. By the time they draw the blood and check it, oh, there's nothing here. And then it comes back again. 12 hours later, it'll come back and get you again.
Mhm.
And it keeps hitting you that way until you're left with nothing.
Mhm.
And I had it for a month that they were trying to treat it as a summer cold. So I was well on my way to being gone.
Mhm.
But basically, after I come home, like Bob, I went to college under the GI Bill. Then I went back into the Navy, to the Officers Candidate School, and spent the next 30 years or 20-some years and going from ship to shore and all. And I was over in Vietnam, and I was at the Cuban blockade and Lebanon, Iraq. So I've been to a lot of the things in the 30 years around the world. So like Bob, I was in and out of the hospital for different things, basically hip replacements or knee replacements or whatever, rotator cuff. But other than that, then retired from the Navy, worked for a buyer for a distribution, purchasing agent for a distribution company for 10 years, and then retired. And the good Lord's keeping me in pretty good health, I guess, because they're still around.
Mr. Mao, I couldn't quite catch, what was your occupation when you returned from Korea?
Mine,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, I was an engineering major in college, and my first job was as a draftsman. And we were one of the assignments that we had was building motors using General Electric parts, and it was for the government, and all the drawings had to be ink drawings, so that was an experience. When you make a mistake with ink drawings, it's difficult to correct.
Mhm.
But we had to make an engine to conform with the specifications that the bidder had set up, using as many parts off the shelf as we could find to do the job.
Mhm.
That was a very interesting job, and some of the stuff that we worked on was the early rockets. the company I worked for built an actuator. The actuator was the device that pushed the fins out when the rocket separated. So it was all interesting work, but I did that for a couple of years, and then I went into the finance field and stayed in the finance field for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
And when I retired, I was vice president of Bank of America. I was a certified fraud examiner. I became an enrolled agent for the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. Lots of stuff.
Yeah.
Have you both been back to Korea after serving in the Korean War?
Yeah, both of us have been revisit.
Mhm.
Absolutely amazing.
When did you guys revisit?
I've revisited twice, so did Chip. Once with a church group and once with the government group. But I was so impressed with the job that the Korean people had done.
Oh, goodness gracious.
That country. When I was there during the war, of course, it was absolutely nothing. I can't describe it because they were bombed and beaten down to nothing. And from that nothing, they built up the country that you're in today. It's just fantastic what they've done.
Yeah.
And I owe it to the education system in your town, in your country. In the War Museum in Seoul, there's a exhibit, I think it's on the 3rd floor, and it shows a teacher out behind a school building
Yeah.
with some kids gathered around under a tree, teaching them during the war, even though the war is going on just a mile away. That teacher is still getting the kids together and still teaching them. That dedication to education is what I think enabled Korea to do the job they've done rebuilding their country.
Yeah, I agree with Bob with that museum there. And it also represented that woman teaching behind the huts, the little Korean children, doing the Japanese, or when they took over in 1910, took over the country until 1945. And so, and of course, continued with the North Koreans, but it just like Bob, is just remarkable. Of course, I went back once under the San Henry Presbyterian Church, that program, and those people were just fantastic. And they took us back, and like Bob, we visited just about, so many things, the National Cemetery, the Pamanjon, Truth Village, War Memorial, ROK Forces, and we even went with the Samsung Electronic Company, toured the Seward Tower. I mean, they didn't let us stand still a minute. We went on, and we just, as Bob said, is just all struck of how it's like going into what we call like New York or Chicago, San Francisco. We couldn't believe it. 50, 60-story buildings as far as you could see, and we never never expected it. I was, man, these people really worked their tails off. So that was really, we were both of us very glad we did. We was really honored too, because it felt embarrassed half the time how much they thanked us. But yes, we did go back and enjoy it.
When you went back, did you guys try any Korean foods? And if so, which ones did you guys like the most?
Well, I like them all, but I just can't get used to kimchi. It takes a little, but I think Bob, you got used to that and liked it, didn't you, or not?
Yeah,
So,
they took us to 2 or 3 Korean restaurants. And whatever food they put on the table, we ate. Most all of the time, the thing that impressed me was that the food was all cut up in small pieces so you could eat it with chopsticks.
Yeah.
And that's you don't get that in the United States. You get a piece of steak, so it's a piece of steak. You have to cut it yourself, but over there, it's already cut up in little pieces so you can eat it with chopsticks.
Right. Yeah, scissors are like a staple sort of tool that is used in every single meal because we want to make sure everything is bite-sized. From what I'm aware, both of you, I think you guys said at the beginning, right? You guys are now part of the Korean War Veterans Association and in the same chapter, is that correct?
correct,
And you said this is the Frederick chapter, is that correct?
correct.
All right. So on a, yeah.
42.
Mhm. So what is your chapter sort of organized and how do you guys operate?
Well, being that we're all old,
Mhm.
we don't do much now.
Yeah,
We used to do a lot.
boy, we were very active at the beginning.
Yeah, now we're more social.
Mhm.
And how long we can exist, I don't know. It's difficult to get people to hold office. And of course, we can't recruit many new members. All of the people in town that would want to join have those that are Korean War veterans and they don't care to join for one reason or another. And we've opened membership up to service veterans, that is those people who have served in Korea, but not during the war, and joined the Korean War veterans. But they don't seem to fit in, or they don't think they fit in because we can't get them to join at all. So we're left with a bunch of 90-year-olds who can't do a lot.
We did so many things earlier. Went to all what we call carnivals around and all the holidays out at Fort Detrick and Army Base here. We had tables set up and talk about the Korean and everything. We even went to the state and we got the highway through our county called the Korean War Memorial Highway. So we got that, we established that and all. One of the things that'll always be there. So, and we did a lot of that kind of stuff when we was younger now. Of course, as Bob said, we're down to, 10 of us or less that's left to do anything, and not too much. Still, every now and then participate in one of the big Veterans Day parade and so forth with our banners.
Right. When was the Frederick chapter formed?
When?
Yeah, when?
1996.
Wow.
So we've been around 25 years.
We still speak in schools occasionally. There have been programs. I think Chip and I have both spoken in at least a dozen schools over the last 15 years. Speech to school assemblies, such, telling them about the Korean War. Our textbooks don't cover the Korean War very well.
Yeah, I noticed that too. Just my education. Yeah. About when you both did these sort of tours, how were you received by the youth or people sort of my age and students? Do you think they were very well aware of what you both did? Or was it something that you felt was completely new to them?
No, when we talked to them, they didn't know much at all about the Korean War. And as a matter of fact, they don't have a lot of questions. They do have some questions from what we tell them, but it's so foreign to them because it's not been introduced to them as such. And I always tell them they want to pay attention because someday they're going to have to make decisions that are going to affect people's lives, and they better understand what war is about. And that's our goal, is to make them understand. Right down to the point of napalm.
Right.
Which you know what napalm is, I'm sure.
Yes.
It's a horrible thing. It burns people to death, but that's part of war. And one day I introduced that idea to the class that I was speaking to, and I got halfway through it and I stopped. I said, maybe the teacher doesn't want the kids to hear this stuff. And he said, no, continue, go ahead, tell them, let them know what it is. So from then on, I've always introduced that subject to them. That's the height of war, when you spray somebody with a burning gas, so to speak, and it burns them to death.
I'm like Bob. I don't think they absorbed everything we were trying to tell them. However, at least got a feeling that at least they know a little bit more than they did before, even though they might not care as much. At least they got a little more knowledge now. At least we hope. Yeah.
Right. As a veterans organization, how has the government sort of helped you guys in spreading your message?
The government?
Right. Does the government provide any sort of specific benefits to your organization?
Not that I know of.
Not our government. The Korean
We do it ourselves.
The Korean government does more for us than our government does.
No, we do our own thing. We have our own fundraising to support the chapter, to give money. Like we used to have golf tournaments, and we give money to Fisher House for wounded veterans from the hospital recovering and all things of this nature. So Wounded Warriors contribute to. So, but each chapter generally does its own. Of course, National does have a fundraiser, but basically they have that to pay for their operating expenses, like to put out the magazine and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, each chapter does their own.
As a final question, what are your thoughts on the Korean War being known today often as the Forgotten War?
Well, I think it used to be that. I don't think we can really say that anymore. Because if you do mention it, people, they might know too much about it, but at least they know about it. Would you say, Robert?
Yeah, they know about it now, but when we started our organization, they didn't know hardly anything. When we come back from Korea, it was very common for you to meet somebody on the street, and they would say, "Oh, hi, how you been? I haven't seen you in a few weeks. Where have you been?"
Yeah, right.
They didn't hardly know that there was a war going on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to both of you for all of your time today. And I really thank you for your service, especially for what you've done for my country, but also just in general for every human, I guess, that's currently living in Korea.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.